earlier. So, my tasks here is the political update. Of course, there will be the next Indonesia update conference in Canberra in September. There will be another political update there again. I'm actually not sure who's going to do that. But my take on the events or developments of the last 6 months actually starts, and I think it's fitting in the book launch as well, actually starts at last year's election. Because I think in order to understand at least some of the developments that we've seen in the last few months, it's important to look back on what kind of political system Yudhoyono left behind. So I start briefly at the end of Yudhoyono's presidency. Then review very quickly the election results from last year. The election was, incidentally, the last time I was here at CSIS, when the presidential election was held. And then we'll review briefly what has happened since then. And I will try to give a cautiously optimistic, like I said, assessment, even though I am, of course, like many others who had high expectations of Jacobi, I am also slightly disappointed with many of the things that he has done since then. But I'll try to balance it, just like we try to balance the stability and stagnation. In the Yudhoyono years, I try to balance the achievements or the good signs that we've seen from Jacobi with the rather disappointments. I'll embed all this in a broader framework of this very, not in great depth, but in a broader framework of multi-party presidential systems. To what extent we can analyze the Indonesian case, perhaps in comparative perspective with other countries that have a similar political system. For some of you interested in political science, you may know that in the 1990s in particular, there was a very strong current in the literature that was saying that this kind of political system, where you have a presidential system and a fragmented parliament, is a recipe for disaster and instability. But we have seen over the last 20 years that in actual fact, we have seen problems, but we have seen very few actual breakdowns of political systems that employ this kind of institutional setting. So Latin America is the main laboratory for these kinds of systems, but at least we know them from Asia as well. The Philippines has a presidential system with a heavily fragmented party system, and Indonesia does as well. So I try to hark back to that kind of context every now and then. That's what I mean with broader implications. And then, I'll try to finish up with a brief outlook, perhaps, where this is all taking us. So, the background is, of course, which hopefully you will all read very soon in the book. When Yudhoyono left office, he left a system that was stable, but that had also not seen, as I was saying earlier this morning, that had not seen any major impetus for new reform. So this, of course, weighed very heavily on the public discourse in Indonesia ahead of the 2014 election. People were disappointed with Yudhoyono for this lack of effort, especially in the reformist pro-democracy circles. Yet we should also not forget that Yudhoyono's popularity ratings at the end of this term were, at least by democratic standards from Western countries, still reasonably high. I think they were around the 50%, which is not bad at all. So clearly there was also satisfaction with the overall development of Indonesian politics, and this is something that I will come back to later on when I talk about the prospects for Indonesia to go perhaps a step further in its democracy. And that's what Yudhoyono did do well, I guess, was he maintained at least a formal commitment to democracy. There was never a real rhetoric that could jeopardize at least the formal institutional structures of democracy. And that then played into the election campaign in 2014, when faced with the choice between Prabowo and Jokowi. Indonesians still made the call that a democratic, a pro-reform candidate should win. And I think because during the Yudhoyono years, this formal commitment, at least, even if it was sometimes very superficial, but this reformist narrative remained in place, and therefore dissatisfaction with the with the various deficiencies, was not strong enough to actually pave the way for a Prabowo win. What was interesting, though, before I come to the presidential election, was that despite widespread dissatisfaction with various factors, when we had the parliamentary election last year, we saw actual continuity. There was no such thing as a major shift in votes to, say, Prabowo's party, or the PDRP, which had hoped that it would get a much stronger result, also did not go past the 20% mark. So instead, what we saw in 2014 in the election was a continuation of heavy fragmentation in the party system. Previously, we had 9 parties in parliament. We now have 10, with NASDAQ being the new one. And the vote was spread even more evenly, even more fragmentedly than it was before. So it showed that during the time of the parliamentary election, the broader picture in the presidential election mattered much less than a lot of people had figured. Instead, it was of local concerns, individual candidates, the campaigning on the ground, and the distribution of money and other gifts that decided the result of the 2014 election. So if we had thought that our dissatisfaction with the way we handled the political system towards the end would, for example, also reflect on the nature of the party system, because of course it was not just Union, but it was also the political parties who topped a lot of criticism during the Union years. Nevertheless, the main message from the parliamentary election was same story as usual. Continue with heavy fragmentation, and this is the distribution of seats now in parliament. And of course, we all know what that means for a president. If you have a lot of competing different interests in parliament, you have to try to cobble together support through very fragmented power centers or interests. As I said, the literature has long been very skeptical that this can provide stability, but then in practice, countries from Latin America have shown that it is actually possible. Brazil is the often cited paradigmatic case where presidentialism with multi-partyism can actually work. So we had this result, and then of course we had the presidential election coming up after that, and the two candidates knew what they were facing when they were, if they were winning the presidential election. So, as I said, in the literature on the sort of the main issues that I'll mention is that building a coalition in a presidential system is more difficult than in a parliamentary system because there are two different mandates in for the president and for the parliament. And even though we do have some presidential systems with two-party systems where you don't need coalitions, nowadays it is almost the norm that in presidential system presidents will have to form coalitions in parliament. This gets even more complicated when the parties are poorly institutionalized, poorly disciplined, and often switch their interests or their loyalties according to very short-term considerations. Nevertheless, these conditions also exist in Latin America, and as I said there, we've seen political instability, some would say procrastination, in several of those countries. The way presidents in multi-party systems have dealt with fragmented parliaments and the potential for constant headwind from parliament is by using the so-called executive tools, the prerogatives that a president has in order to get parliament on board behind his or her policies. This can be very simply the appointment to cabinet posts, this can be the distribution of patronage, this can be other favors if there are links between politics and business, tax advantages, whatever. But it can also be control of individual parties in parliament. If the president has control over his own party, that's already very good, but if it's fragmented, then you also need control over various of the smaller parties. So managing the heads of the parties in parliament is a good step of getting parliament behind the executive. So if parliament is on board, that's a good thing, but nevertheless you need other factors that could help the system to remain stable and effective. So you need checks and balances outside Parliament, through strong civil society, media, the judicial system, that can all ensure accountability and that the executive remains on track. And what I was saying in my introductory remarks, if the question is about whether the democratic system is actually at risk, you need to have a sort of narrative or a kind of public appreciation for the system that goes beyond individuals, but that appreciates the actual institutions of democracy. And in many of the sort of third wave democratization countries, this narrative is sort of inspired by the events that introduced democracy. A reformist spirit that even if there are problems with how the political system unfolds, you try to make it better by improving democracy rather than going back to an authoritarian regime. And this is something, as I said, where we should probably give credit to Yono, that he never questioned democracy as a virtue, as something that he wanted to maintain, even though he was often weak on the detail. So we come back to that, how Jacobi has dealt with the complexities of the system and with the challenges shortly. What was interesting after the parliamentary election was, of course, that despite the continuing fragmentation in the system, we, for the first time since the end of the New Order, we saw something like polarization along two camps. We are yet to see whether this will last. Of course, I'll come back to that later, we have already splits in at least the Volker Party and Petiga. So whether the Prabowo coalition will last much longer is open at this point. But at least during the presidential election, there was an unprecedented, sharp polarization between two camps. And at that time, it looked as if perhaps the problems in the institutional setup could shift from problems of fragmentation to problems of confrontation. I will mention later that this has not really materialized up until this point. Parliament has not been the source of problems for Jacobi. The problems have come from elsewhere. So Jacobi was elected, of course, then, as we all know, and he formed a government, a cabinet, which in many aspects evoked or resembled the cabinets of Yudhoyono, despite earlier promises that he would be much more outspoken and much more direct in how he would assemble his cabinet, that he would not distribute favors, etc. He would not give cabinet posts to parties who asked for something in return. In the end, of course, he was not able to appoint his cabinet by himself. He had to negotiate with other parties. In this emerging polarization, he brought into his coalition, apart from the PDP, 3 other parties. And of course, several appointments in the cabinet were eventually political appointments, which, as we now see in several cases, were not really held up to the task. But at that point, it was important for him to strengthen his position, to follow this line in order not to alienate the allies that he had at that time. So Time magazine titled, of course, A New Hope, and I think it was shared widely in Indonesia and many other, or amongst many other observers who follow Indonesian politics. And yeah, I shall spend the remainder of the presentation now whether that hope has been fulfilled. So if we look at the cabinet, as I said, there were lots of questionable political appointments, but let's focus on the positive performance, in the positive faces in the cabinet, at least as it was perceived at the time. I think a lot of people were happy that the Minister for Religious Affairs was retained. Discrimination against religious and ethnic minorities had been a constant feature during the Yudhoyono years. Yudhoyono's reluctance to tackle this issue and to confront his then Minister of Religious Affairs. Suryadhara Ali was then replaced after he was indicted for corruption charges. So his successor was retained by Jacobi, and I think there was a strong message that religious affairs would now be handled in a more positive way. That the Minister for Religious Affairs would be a Minister for members of all religions, not just for Muslims or for Hindu members. Just I think 2 days ago or so, Setara Institute published a report in which they said that the incidence of religious discrimination had actually not gone down since Trobe took office. So that's of course worrying, and to be honest I was a bit surprised because it has largely disappeared from the media. But that's probably because we don't see those very dramatic, spectacular outbreaks of violence like the ones we saw against the Shia or against the Ahmadis in the last few years. But apparently, on a smaller scale, this does still continue, which is certainly an important piece of homework for our minister there. The other phase that drew a lot of attention was Anis Besweda. Dina was talking about educational outcomes during the junior years and how disappointing they have been, and that education should be a priority for the new president. And Anis Besweda was regarded as the right man in this job. He came certainly with a lot of good ideas, but once again, the homework remains. So far, I think he has not been able to really assert his authority on his ministry and on his and has not really pushed his policies much through. It's of course very early days. We'll have to see, but Anis, like many others, had to realize that reforming the education system in Indonesia is really a mammoth task. I also put a picture there of the 8 female ministers. This is more a statement about quantity rather than quality at this point. But yeah, we had, of course, Anis' presentation about representation of female politicians in the highest echelons of power. So Jokowi is appointed of 8 female ministers who's widely lauded. This was followed up recently, of course, with an all-female committee for the selection of KPK commissioners. So he does seem to be committed to actually promoting women to very influential positions. So that in itself is a good thing. I'll be cautious with a statement about the achievements of quality of these ministers. Of course, it's no secret that in particular Puan Maharani was widely criticized, or the choice of Puan Maharani for that ministry was widely criticized. But very few observers at that time, when the cabinet was announced, would probably have predicted that the Minister for Maritime Affairs would, in a very short period of time, become the most popular minister in Indonesia. I'll come back to her measures, to which she owes this popularity shortly. So, the cabinet, I think, got a lot of criticism when it was announced, and rightly so. But in between, I think there were some good choices, and for which I'd be very hopeful that if we give them time, that hopefully they can achieve something in their ministries. So, other positive signs, the fuel subsidies have been mentioned before, and of course you can't get around them. Any assessment of Jokowi's first 100 days or first 6 months in office would mention the fuel subsidies as his biggest achievement. And it's hard to argue with that if you look at the challenges that the administration is facing and the restrictive fiscal space that they have in order to tackle these challenges. So you can argue about the social impact of the subsidies in general, but I think it's widely agreed that it was mostly the middle classes and the upper middle classes who benefited from that in the past. The money that was saved now can and will hopefully be invested in measures that will benefit a much broader part of the population. And of course, the biggest item on Jokowi's plate in this regard, in using the money from the fuel subsidies, are his trademark policies, the Kartu Pintar and Kartu Sehat. I guess Jokowi probably hoped that this would also run off the mill a bit more smoothly, a bit more quickly, but the initiatives are there, they are now up and running, and we will have to see how effective they really eventually be. But that's certainly the fulfillment of an election promise, sticking to it and also taking the right measures in order to fund it. how far it can go and how effective it can be, given the shortage of qualified teachers and the shortage of qualified doctors. We will actually have to see. But as a first step of making education and healthcare more affordable for the poorer segments of society, I think this was very important that Jacobi got that going fairly early on. And recently there have also been some snippets of media news that I saw where he actually, when he inaugurated parts of this program, he distributed cards, and he did link this to the lifting of the fuel subsidies. So he's showing the population that I can only do this because it took the unpopular step, it was unpopular, of actually lifting the fuel subsidies. So you could say then, on the positive side of things, he did follow through with some of his promises, and he is on track at least to implement these over his first term. So there's 4 years to go now, and if this works out reasonably well in the coming years, he will have good social capital, or political capital rather, to use that in an upcoming election. Had he waited much longer, perhaps until Parliament settles into a more confrontational stance, maybe that it would have been a bit more difficult, but he used, he wasted no time, let's put it like this, he wasted no time in order to get this off the ground as quickly as possible. Okay, this is probably as much or as many positives as I could find. I recently had a discussion with a friend of mine about Papua. I've left it out. I'm still unsure what his recent statements about Papua mean. In principle, if he doesn't end transmigration, I think that would be a very good thing. But we've already heard one of his ministers contradicting him on this. He has visited Papua already several times, probably, I'm not sure about this, but possibly more often than Yudhoyono did in his second term. So there are signs that Jacobi is concerned about Papua, but at the same time, the military, of course, came up earlier on. There are no signs that the presence of the military over there will change anytime soon. The comments about lifting restrictions on foreign journalists were immediately weakened by statements from Teju saying, oh well, we'll still monitor them when they go in. So I'm not quite sure yet where Papua is going, and I'm reluctant to see these early steps that Jacobi took as good signs. We'll see. So, disappointments, there were quite a few. I think they received so much coverage in the news, both domestically as well as internationally, because the disappointments occurred in areas where the expectations were particularly high. Areas where Yudhoyono was seen as having failed, as having been too weak to confront entrenched interests. Jacobi was coming as the outsider, and during the campaign at least, he pledged his commitment to human rights, to anti-corruption. Of course, Yudhoyono had done that as well, but we knew that Yudhoyono had not really followed through on many of his issues. Now hopes were high that Jacobi would do that differently. And it's, I think, the main reason why the disappointment is very deeply felt in many circles, that he didn't stand by the Anti-Corruption Commission, the slide here, when the role with the police unfolded. This was, of course, about the appointment of Budi Gunawan as head of the police. The follow-up to this has led to a weakening of the KPK in a very rapid, very quick succession. There were many blows against the KPK that have possibly weakened it so that it will not be able to recover anytime soon. The proposal that military officers should sit or influence over the KPK, now the police wants to nominate its candidates for the KPK. We may only have seen the beginning of the weakening of the KPK. This would be an arena where Jacobi would be very well advised to stand up for the interests of the KPK. But he probably saw his withdrawal of Budi Gunawan as police chief as a major step. towards standing by the KPK. But of course, he's now second in line, and the other, or his replacement, who is now top cop, was not necessarily seen as a much better choice in terms of the relations with the KPK. Okay, so that was one disappointment. Anti-corruption drive severely weak. Second, this is probably my view from the outside. Within Indonesia, I don't think that was a disappointment for the majority of the people. But if we go down back to who supported Jokowi in the campaign, people who in 2014 stood behind him actively, the volunteers, etc., many of these people actually share the concerns of the international community about the death penalty. And therefore here, even though Jokowi has not lost the support of the majority, as far as I can tell, of Indonesians still is behind the death penalty for drug smugglers. But the people who were key to Jokowi's support are not. And he has disappointed many of them with the refusal of clemency, especially to the two Australian guys, but also the handling of the death penalty in general, not reading the clemency appeals, of not selectively reading the statistics and using it to his own political advantage. Many argue that beyond the fact that there is no evidence that the death penalty will actually be a deterrent, but also the numbers that Jokowi used in order to justify this were widely regarded as questionable. So this was, of course, had massive international implications. The Australian ambassador was withdrawn. Just heard he's back since yesterday. So, of course, the long-term damage in the diplomatic relations will continue, but not in the form the initial reaction was. But it will probably have further repercussions. What is good is that at least the death penalty has now come up again in the revisions of the criminal code, so at least we talked about, but I doubt that it will be removed. Then there are the disappointment about Jokowi's failure basically to stand up to Megawati. That was already relevant in the previous slide about the KPK, of course, where Megawati was seen as the driving force to be in Budi Gunawan's nomination. But also in general, how Jokowi has handled his relationship with Megawati. I think people had hoped or expected that he'd play a more active role in trying to push through his role as president. And the role that he played at the PDP Congress was widely ridiculed and pitied, that he wasn't even allowed to speak there. So this arguably is his biggest problem now. What he's going to do with the party that nominated him. Okay, push up a bit quicker, given the 5-minute mark already. So I'm sure we can discuss in the Q&A more about Jokowi's relationship with PDIP and with Megawati. Just briefly out on the foreign policy, perhaps, this was an opportunity for Jokowi to present himself as a statesman. The commemoration of the 60th anniversary of the Asian African Conference. It looked good, but substantially there wasn't really much that came out of that conference. The Declaration of Palestine and a few well-meant statements. But for international confidence, for Jokowi to appear on the global stage of the conference being hosted here, that was probably good and perhaps also necessary, because at the same time Jokowi was also a bit confrontational, of course, with his regional neighbors, with his policy of blowing up illegal fishing vessels. That raised a few eyebrows in neighboring countries. And I think the message that is being sent out here is an important one, that Jokowi wants to appear strong in the region, perhaps also because this was something that was seen as a disadvantage in his campaign. He's a Prabowo, so he has to show a bit of strength. But just like with the executions, I wonder if this is the right arena or the right policy field where he should show strength. This blowing up of vessels, just like the executions, is not unpopular in Indonesia. On the contrary, you will know that better than me. Susi is the most popular minister. But overall, approval ratings for Jokowi have gone down significantly in the last 6 months in the various opinion polls. But I don't think we should read too much into this. Some of his policies were not popular, lifting of fuel subsidies, for example. But he has suffered, of course, a reputation due to the KPK problems and due to his relationship with Megawati. And this is early on in his presidency. We will have to see how he manages those important relationships. He is still on fairly high approval ratings generally, even though they have declined. But it will be, I think, that these key areas of anti-corruption and relations with Megawati that will determine his popularity ratings in the future. Briefly, away from the presidential palace, I indicated earlier on, Parliament has not been the problem for Jokowi, and that is partly due because Parliament has its own problems, as usual. There's this familiar story of factional fighting within parties. Golkar and Petiga are the ones that are most heavily affected now. And because this affects the upcoming Pilkada at the end of the year, Parliament has basically been paralyzed by this, over the implications of these splits, because it may prevent the parties from nominating candidates. So since the beginning of the year, I think there have only been 3 laws that were passed in Parliament, so there was not even an opportunity for Parliament to be an obstacle to the government. We will have to see how that pans out in the future, whether the polarization will continue, or if it goes back to more fragmented interest representation in Parliament. So what do the first few months of Jokowi's presidency tell us about the Yudhoyono years? They tell us, for example, what I said in the morning already, that I think Jokowi, he inherited a system that was not totally consolidated. He is now confronting entrenched interests that were not tackled by Yudhoyono, and he has to deal with the outcome of these shortcomings of the Yudhoyono presidency. At the same time, what I also said earlier, Yudhoyono made sure that general public commitment to democracy has remained in place. And Jokowi is now faced with the task, basically, of building on that and consolidating that. And I put it a bit dramatically towards the end. The alternative for Jokowi, when I say to ruin democracy, I don't necessarily mean there a regression into authoritarianism, but perhaps more that the kind of, at least public commitment to democracy may be significantly undermined. And that the kind of politics that we saw in 2014, especially the populist rhetoric from Prabowo, may become the norm, or some other force that we don't see yet at the moment will take advantage if Jokowi fails to consolidate the democracies how the supporters wanted him to do that. Of course, that's very early days, as I said, but there is a risk for the next election already now, and that is the fractured relationship that he has with Megawati. If Jokowi does not fix this relationship, he will not be nominated for another term in the next election by PDIP, which would mean he needs another vehicle. That will imply that there will be completely new negotiations again. He will have to try to unform his new party, a new party. There was, of course, already a lot of chatter about that with his volunteers. But if only for electoral considerations with a view to 2019, Jokowi has to fix this relationship with Megawati one way or the other. Otherwise, I don't think that we will see many positive outcomes from his presidency. So this is where the main issue is in his own party. It's partly in the cabinet. Some ministers clearly have not performed very well, have often contradicted the president in public. That's not necessarily good for coherence and for stability, for public perceptions of the government. And some of the problems are also more directly in the palace. Out of the experience that Jokowi has with several issues, he needs time to settle into this office, and in the first few months at least, the lack of a public face of the government, like a proper spokesperson who can defend Jokowi's policies in the face of public pressure. He now has, of course, appointed Tete Mazduki there, and I think he really needs someone who can communicate presidential policies more effectively to the media, both domestically as well as internationally. So problems exist, but not as the literature had predicted from fragmented parliament. The problems are at the moment for Jacobi elsewhere. Which leaves us for the discussion. I think I covered more or less half positives and disappointments. So for some people, Jacobi has been an utter disappointment, but I don't think that we should forget the various positives that were there at least at the beginning as well.